This is Power Athlete Radio. With your hosts, Denny Cave, Professor Booty, and the Luke Summers. And now, toes forward, hips locked, shoulders set, and retract those scapulars. It's time for some knowledge bombs.
Thanks for tuning in to Power Athlete Radio. This week we welcome Dr. Dan Reardon of the burgeoning genetic testing company, Fitness Genes. As is tradition at Power Athlete, we are constantly striving to introduce you to new ways to empower your performance, and this episode is certainly no exception. Listen in as we dive into a discussion with Dr. Reardon about the benefits of having your genetics tested. As we discover, we are genetically predisposed to respond to different foods in different ways, as well as respond to varying training protocols differently. These two factors being massively influential in our performance, Dan explains how we can manipulate both to excel, all thanks to simple genetic testing. Although this chat turned out to be a long one, it is not without fascinating practical application. We reveal John and Luke's test results and find out just what they're made of, quite literally. Also, we'll give you the details on how to undergo your own genetic testing through Fitness Genes. This is episode 121.
What's happening, Power Athlete Nation? Welcome to another episode of Power Athlete Radio. This is Denny. I'm here with John, Luke, Tex, Callie, and Bobby. And today our special guest is Dr. Dan Reardon from Fitness Genes. Dan, thanks for taking the time to talk some shop with us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
You know what? Maybe we can just kind of get the ball rolling a little bit, and you can just kind of explain what you do and kind of the whole process that involves.
Okay. Well, we're principally a DNA testing company on the face of it, but actually our expertise is in the interpretation of genetic information and genetic variations. So what we do is we genetically assess people, and we're specifically looking for variations in genes that give us information that allow us to predict how you should best exercise and how you should best eat, all based on what your goals are, but using your DNA as the framework, as well as some overlaying environmental information to essentially give you as efficient as training and nutrition recommendations as we possibly can. In a nutshell, that's what we do.
Awesome. So, Dan, I know that Luke and John have both been through this process, and how did you guys meet, and what took place after that to get them to the point that they are now, which is questioning their entire genetic makeup?
Callie, I'll jump in on this one. Where it all kind of started was, as I talked about kind of recently, I went out and I visited the guys out at Baylor, and having been there for a couple days, one of the things that kind of struck me interesting was their nutrition recommendations. The nutritionist gets up, a dietitian, and starts talking about, this week you should be putting on some weight, we're upping the carbohydrate, we're doing this, we're trying to get you more protein. And so after she talked about some of the, recommendations and what they wanted to do, I went over and rapped with her a little bit about, what their nutrition approach was and kind of, who was kind of, basically steering that ship. And, she handed me some information, and in it talked about like a 60% carbohydrate, 25% protein, and a 15% fat macronutrient breakdown, and the approved, protein sources other than, lean meats was Gatorade and muscle milk. And I'm sitting there looking at like 60%, 60% caloric load of a guy who's, 300 pounds is eating 6,000 calories. That's, almost 4,000 calories just from carbohydrate. So, I kind of listened to it, and then when I was working with the offensive line guys, I'm sitting there looking at these guys, and, they're some big, strong dudes, and, one of the guys looked at me, and he's like, man, how come you don't look like us? I'm like, because I don't eat like you guys. And, what the other thing kind of struck me a little interesting is you have certain guys there that, are following these nutritional recommendations that are, 6'4", 6'5", 245, 250 pounds that are 4% body fat. And then you got another guy over there who's 6'4", 6'5", 340 pounds at like 35% body fat. And, the thing which was interesting to me is, nutrition and macronutrient breakdowns and being able to prescribe certain things, can't be just blanket. You just can't have a one-size-fits-all and hope that it just kind of gets everybody. And if it is, it's written towards the bell curve. So just looking at these different athletes, I realized that there had to be something different within the genetic makeup that would allow a person maybe to be able to, be more susceptible or be able to digest or tolerate more carbohydrate. And just that kind of got me thinking a little bit about, some genetic factors. And just about that time, I came in contact with some of the people from Fitness Genes, and we just ended up starting up a conversation. And Dan came down and we hung out and, rapped a little bit. I kind of posed him with some questions about, performance training and, are there genetic factors of, how much are, obviously nature versus nurture, that, you have a certain genetic makeup, but you talk about, being able to train past your genetics if you knew about them, being able to match up, carbohydrate and, the ability to process fat. And I remember Lauren Brooks made an interesting comment to me. She's like, I don't do well on a higher fat diet. I tend to do better on a lower fat diet. And I just, have run into different athletes that work better on different macronutrient ratios. And so I believe that it's more than just training. I think there's some genetic makeup. And so it kind of led me here. And Dan and I have just been kind of brainstorming, going back and forth. And he's come down to train with us a bunch. And we got some genetic testing done as Luke and I as guinea pigs, and then we kicked it out to the power athlete coaches. And so those of you guys that have your kits and are dragging on them, please send them back.
Dan, can you explain how you guys go about doing that genetic testing? I was expecting to send like hair follicles and fingernails, but that wasn't the case. So can you explain how you guys go about that, and then maybe dive into some of the results that you saw in John and Luke?
Yeah, so, Callie, wait, did you run to the post office and get your package back? Because you just told me you put a bunch of fingernail clippings in there.
I had been saving them for months.
Well, so we do saliva testing. When we actually first set up our company, we initially did buccal swabs, which is where you essentially swipe the inside of your cheek. But as the company's grown and progressed, we've been able to now move on to much more advanced technologies. So we actually use one of the most advanced technologies now for collecting saliva samples. And when you collect saliva, what you also get is you get cheek cells within the saliva. So when you do your test, you spit into the tube, and then there's like a buffer that sort of snaps into the saliva that preserves the DNA. And it'll preserve the DNA for years, so that there's no issues with transporting the sample back to our laboratory. When it gets back to our laboratory, the first thing that happens is we extract the DNA from the saliva. So there's a whole process of DNA extraction. And once the DNA is extracted, there's a huge machine that then layers the DNA onto a plate. And it's then from this plate then that we run assays to establish your gene results. So we've essentially built all of our own assays. So we have the variations that we look at are the ones that have come from our own research, our own very high level research with the quality of the team, the quality of the scientific team that we actually have. And ultimately we end up with these huge digital sheets that have to have a human eye go over them first. We look for any abnormalities that we might find, and then we can sort of delve deeper into, just checking the quality of the samples and things like that. And ultimately, we end up with your gene results, and then the gene results go onto our computer system, to the membership system, and then that gets fed through our genetic model that then starts to distribute your results to you. So that's the process by which we do the testing and then ultimately deliver your results.
Great. And I guess before maybe we talk about the results, I'm just curious as to why, this just kind of popped into my head, but as to why you think this isn't a common practice in, say, like primary care, like by your doctor.
It's interesting. So just a little bit of history. I mean, the human genome was decoded by about 2003. There was a big human genome project. And so really a lot of the work on the human genome has been going on since 2003 in terms of trying to get a real solid understanding of how we can use the information that gene testing can deliver. Now, when people talk about large data sets, well, approximately, when you consider the large data, approximately 60% of large data is genetic. So we need computer systems and we need computer programs that are actually able to essentially decipher the genetic material and then somehow try and interpret it and understand it. So there's huge, the big computer companies around the world, the likes of IBM. IBM built a big system called IBM Watson, which is $1 billion cognitive computer system that people are now starting to try and feed in genomic models into. Microsoft have a few products. You might have heard Google and Amazon are now competing in the genomic storage market, which is not just storage, it's also ultimately it will be analysis. Pathway Genomics, a big medical testing, genetics testing company, they're doing the same with the way they're building out their computer systems. So it's only now that we're getting to a point in time where, from a medical perspective, we can really start to think about using gene information to either predict the likelihood of illness or start to consider screening programs or even look at methods of treatment. In terms of primary care, there would never have been a reason to have been doing gene testing apart from, there are sort of certain situations. So things like if you're screening families for example, the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes, which are the ones which give females an increased risk of ovarian and breast cancer. If you're screening for genes, perhaps that, some of the familial cancers, or other familial cancers, or other familial diseases, then maybe you would do screening. But in terms of, examining whole genomes to try and, give people from the outset genetic information, it's something that we haven't really been in a position to do, but there are companies now that are sort of specialising in that and looking to do that. Now, from our perspective, we don't do anything to do with kind of sort of anything medical. The reason is that anything medical is very tightly controlled by the FDA. So 23andMe, for example, got in trouble a couple of years ago, and their health product was taken off the market because they were essentially using the gene testing to give medical recommendations, which the FDA weren't happy about. They've now gradually been able to bring their medical product back onto the market, but that's been a bit of a painful process to do that.
Sure.
But for us, Fitness Genes, what we do is we just focus on the gene variations that can tell us how you should exercise and how you should eat. So we don't get involved in the sort of the disease type stuff. So where in terms of medical practice, it's all moving towards sort of proactive medicine rather than reactive medicine. So reactive being you react when people get diseases, and what all the research and time and money is now going into proactive medicine, where people proactively look beforehand and predict your likelihood of getting diseases and treat them long before you get them. What we're doing is we're in the proactive stage of management, which is we proactively manage people through diet and exercise to make sure they maintain good body composition or get a good body composition. Issues of longevity, but then also our roots are based in muscle hypertrophy, losing body fat, and enhancing sports performance.
Okay, so in terms of proactive type of, integrating proactive nutrition, are you looking for deficiencies as well in the system? Do you look at things or even, if you have allergies or you're more prone to have inflammation due to, certain foods, is that also sort of what you cover?
Yes. It's certainly for a few things. So if I give you some examples, we look at lactose intolerance. So lactose, or if we kind of go back in time a little bit, humans were never designed to be lactose tolerant as adults because we would never have consumed sort of milk type products as adults. And it was the farmers X number of years ago who started to consume the milk of sort of cows, the process of milking cows, etc., that eventually a mutation occurred, which meant that we were able to digest lactose, if you like, later into life. So the mutation in the LCT gene, or in the MEM6 part of the gene, was something. The mutation actually led us to being able to metabolize, digest, whatever you want to call it, lactose. However, the majority of the world's population are intolerant to lactose, but not everybody. And there are certainly benefits to to some of the foods that contain lactose. So if you are able to consume lactose, it's definitely something that you don't necessarily want to be removing from your diet. And what's happened in our current era, if you like, of health and nutritional management, the problem is people give generic recommendations. So what's the first thing you hear when people talk about losing weight? They'll say, stop consuming dairy products. Well, okay, if you stop consuming dairy products and you're not lactose intolerant, you'll essentially make yourself lactose intolerant, because your production of lactase will reduce. You'll potentially change your gut flora, so they won't be they won't be digesting the lactose either. So, and then you lose the potential benefits of some of the foods that contain lactose. I mean, for example, if you're able to access really good quality milk or good quality cream, these are good sources of protein, good sources of calcium. There's no reason, and good sources of fats. There's no reason to remove them from your diet if you don't need to. Mm-hmm. So lactose is one of the ones that we look at.
So Dan, let me jump in and ask you to make a clarification here. I think just to make a distinction, the genetic testing, you're looking for a genetic predisposition to react a certain way to certain things, or it sort of provide a glimpse into how your body might behave in a certain situation. Yeah. However, there's not necessarily that true one-to-one correlation, in that it is a for sure thing, correct? Or is it just this is what we've seen through trends, through genetic trends, or is it like 100% you're going to be prone to XYZ?
Oh no, absolutely, 100%. I mean, so for example, again, so perhaps a little bit of science. A gene produces a protein, and a protein has an effect on the body. So the LCT gene leads into the production of the enzyme lactase, and lactase is the enzyme that breaks down lactose. So if you don't produce lactase, then you're not going to be able to digest lactose unless you have gut bacteria that are doing that are doing the digestion for you. So this gene, for example, the LCT gene, in the majority of the world's population, is if it says you are genetically lactose intolerant, then you are almost certainly lactose intolerant, or you will be probably after the age of 20.
Do you have a kind of just a general idea of how long, if you cut out lactase, that'll take for that adjustment?
How long if you cut out lactose? It's really difficult to say. For some people it can be. I mean, so if you take the classic. I mean, classically people will stick to a diet for about 4 to 6 weeks, and when they then resume their normal eating, it might be consuming ice cream, putting milk back in their coffee, consuming cheese. All of a sudden they have a whole host of problems. They're consuming these foods, and they're having bowel problems, and they're feeling tired and fatigued. And it might be because of the overconsumption of calories, and it's a response to the overconsumption of calories from being in such a calorie deficit for that period of time. But I would say within certainly within sort of 4 to 6 weeks is long enough to substantially reduce your lactase output on consumption of lactose. And then what we tend to recommend for people that who are lactose tolerant, but they are displaying symptoms of being lactose intolerant, we have a couple of systems within our user area where we sort of recommend how people can gradually reintroduce lactose back into their diet, so that they can continue to consume lactose-containing products. Because actually, it's very difficult to be truly lactose free. I mean, the amount of lactose in, slimming bars, typical weight loss slimming bars and things like that, it's quite a lot. It's tough to be lactose free. And even sometimes when you buy in lactose free products, they're not lactose free. What they are is they're products that have had lactase added to them. So that's how they make the claim of it being lactose free. They're not actually lactose free. So it's,
it's to neutralize.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's like the milk, for the milk for people that are lactose intolerant, they just add the lactase into it.
Yeah. So I think we one of the things that we can sometimes do by giving generic recommendations, we actually screw people up, and we need to really empower as professionals, as coaches, as fit professionals, that we have to look at the ways that we can truly personalize the information we give people. And given that we now have access to gene variations and gene information, we can really start doing that.
So you think, actually, I mean, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole of milk because there's such much more fucking interesting stuff to deal with.
Yeah.
But do you think that actually that was a positive genetic mutation, that the ability to consume milk past weaning and also to digest the milk of other mammals actually was a positive thing?
Totally. I mean, if you want anecdotal evidence of that, look at the bodybuilders from the 50s and 60s and 70s.
Yeah, the Vince Caranda diet. And all that.
Look at those guys. I mean, they were drinking whole milk. They weren't consuming supplements and things like that.
They were washing down handfuls of Dianabol with raw milk, which is actually the early Arnold Schwarzenegger Vince Caranda diet, where it's like copious amounts of raw milk and handfuls of Dianabol.
Exactly. But it had its place. I think that I mean, put it like this: if it wasn't positive for mankind, it wouldn't have been a mutation that would have stuck with the passage of time. Mm-hmm. So it's something that kind of contributed to our survival because it meant we had more food that we could consume. Sure. And there's no doubt that, I mean, listen, the supplement market is a $30-40 billion market. The biggest selling product in the supplement market is whey protein, and whey is an extract of milk, right? So it's absolutely it was absolutely something positive. The issues, though, are that there are still people that are lactose intolerant. And just as an aside, look at the massive increase over the last 20 years of people getting inflammatory bowel conditions, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease. No one can necessarily pin down the origins of these diseases, right? So people talk about genetics, there might be genetic predispositions. But look at the damage that's containing the damage that you can do consuming foods that contain lactose if you're intolerant to lactose, because that almost certainly will lead to degrees of gut inflammation. And back to what we just said, most foods contain lactose.
Well, and also we've also seen this huge, people are so nervous about fermented and like unclean things that everything's over sterilized. I mean, if you take a look, like, we'd be interested to do some genetic testing on someone like the Maasai warrior and some of those groups, because historically African Americans usually have some form of lactose intolerance, and so here's a group that survives exclusively on meat, blood, and fermented milk they make into a porridge, and the fermentation process allows them to digest, and also because the fermentation is the removing of the lactose in cheese. So it's pretty interesting that these guys consume dairy, and yet if you ever see those guys, they're 6'6", 6'7", 6'8", and they're shredded.
Agreed.
So it's pretty interesting, and we run into people all the time at our seminar that talk like, oh, I'm lactose intolerant, I can't have dairy. I'm like, oh, let's make a distinction between fresh dairy and fermented dairy. And, if anything, like, I don't really drink fresh dairy anymore, but fermented dairy, we have, cheese and Greek yogurt and other things, just because of the, the fermentation and the, probiotic and different deal.
Dan, so I'm sure that a lot of high-level athletes and, obviously some normal jamokes like ourselves are having this type of testing done, but they're also comparing and contrasting that with blood work, which we see done very frequently with high-level athletes. Can you talk about the different snapshots that you'll see and how they compare and contrast?
Yeah, sure. So, for example, one of the products that we built is we built a testosterone evaluation template where we look at gene variations that give us an indication of the likelihood of you having high or low testosterone levels. Now, so what we did, so if you think about it, we we give the basis of the likelihood of whether you might have high, medium, or low. But what blood work does is blood work will give you at a point in time what that hormonal value is. Now, the problem with blood work's fine where you're using it over the passage of time. Single point in time, a blood test at a single point in time, apart from in an acute setting, has very little value. So if you're looking at hormones, for example, hormones, one blood test at a single point in time looking at a hormone is utterly useless because it's, your hormones vary and fluctuate so much. So if you're gonna take bloods, consistently, so for example, let's say cortisol as an example. If you really want to know what's going on with your cortisol, you need to take probably at least maybe 10 blood tests over the course of the day. So when you wake up, what's going on through the morning, what's going on through the afternoon, what's going on before you go to bed, how does it relate to after training, after you eat, all that sort of stuff, to really know what's going on with your blood levels. With your cortisol. Testosterone. I mean, testosterone is so sensitive. You could literally, you could take a blood test now, and and I'm sure our testosterone levels, whatever they'll be, but all of a sudden you stick a picture of a naked woman up on the screen, and all of a sudden our testosterone levels are going to fly up. Again,
for some of us,
yeah.
Or man.
Naked person. Person of clothes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But so when we look at the testosterone screening that you're doing, like for example, Luke is in the pink area, so he's at the lowest, I'm at the highest.
Yeah.
Okay, so is that actually giving us a genetic predisposition for higher testosterone, or is it actually testing our testosterone?
So what we're looking at is a selection of gene variations that give information about testosterone production, steroid hormone binding globulins, estrogen receptors, other gene variations that we know have a propensity towards you having a higher level of testosterone naturally. Mm-hmm. So we use that as a predictive tool. I can give you one again. Our company, we have the research and the science, but we also have anecdotal information as well from customers. So to give you an anecdotal story from a customer, one of our young customers, early 20s, just so you know, Luke and John are currently comparing their testosterone levels, and we've got John high.
Propensity for testosterone.
Yeah, propensity, yeah.
Well, somebody in this room has a couple kids, so...
How's that working out for you?
Well, it's killing my testosterone level.
So we had a young guy, early 20s, and he did his fitness genes test, and he did his test score, and it came back as medium. And it's actually not very often that we sort of get younger people. I think it's obviously our population is, we're not talking about the millions yet, so it's very hard to really give really solid statistical population-based statistical data. But it came back medium, and when I got on the phone with him and we were talking about it, and I was sort of asking him the typical questions that relate to, could you be suffering from low testosterone? And to go very long story short, I told him to go to his doctor and to get his testosterone levels checked. It's not an easy thing to do in the UK, so he ended up having to pay privately to go and get his hormones checked. And his testosterone levels came back quite low. So he then sort of got referred to a doctor that specialises in hypergonadism, which is, in men, low testosterone production, to sort of, look at the process of what he can do to start to increase his testosterone. Now, he did follow the guidance that we gave on the test score, which, is typically guidance about, improving body composition, reducing body fat, heavy lifting, for some people, incorporating vitamin D3, zinc and magnesium. There might be some evidence for things like fenugreek, blocking the 5-alpha reductase step, all those kinds of things, fat intake and whatever. And this was an example where a model that we built was actually a very useful tool for this guy, because it prompted him to start thinking about his own testosterone health, that then led him to get in touch with me, that then led him to go to a doctor. So sure. This is just an example where, genetics are the building blocks of what will ultimately be spat out in a blood test.
Yeah.
But blood tests are heavily influenced by environment.
Kelly, and the one thing I think everybody needs to kind of remember too is that there's, when they say nature versus nurture, what they're talking about is like, nature obviously being your, genetic makeup, the proteins, how it all fits, and then based on that, I mean, it might be anywhere from 40 to 50% is what you do to nurture that. Like for example, you might be, have a propensity to high testosterone, but yet because you sleep, 3 hours a night and you have a super pro-inflammatory diet and, you've not exercised and therefore your body fat's over 30%. I'm fairly sure that a lack of sleep, high body fat, and no exercise and a crappy inflammatory diet will kill your testosterone levels.
So, Dan, given the example you just used, I'm curious as to, I know this isn't your specialty, but I'm curious as to if you can make behavioral inferences from this type of testing.
Well, I mean, you can. So the thing with, I can give you a good example. I think, and I hope I'm answering your question and giving you this example. They looked at, one of the things with us at the moment is we do a lot of collaborative work with universities. So we've just done a really big study with Loughborough University in the United Kingdom. It's one of the biggest sports universities in the UK. But specifically, the project was to do with obesity and obesity-related genetics and gene variations. That aside, a few years back, there was a study done that looked at testing obese people for the FTO gene. So the FTO gene is a gene that the variant of it, 70% of people who are morbidly obese will have the variant of the FTO gene. So they wanted to do a study kind of looking at the psychology of knowing this type of information. Now, the cynical person would say that somebody who's very overweight or obese, when they find out they have the mutant copy of the FTO gene, they will use that as an excuse that the reason I'm obese is because of this, therefore, screw it, I'm not even going to bother trying. But that's not actually what happens. What happens is when they find out they have this variant of the FTO gene, they lose the shame of being obese or being overweight, and that prompts them to actually then start to make positive changes to their life to try to lose weight. So actually, you can be empowered by your genes and gene variations. So another example, when we talk about people having endurance tendencies and potentially like metabolic endurance tendencies, very overweight people potentially could have decent endurance potential, because ultimately they store energy very well. And if you're an endurance athlete, you want to be able to store energy well to be able to use it. So we can actually give very positive pieces of performance type information to people who otherwise might not ever get good performance information. And again, it empowers them. So it's about personalization, and it's about empowering people in the most positive way that then prompts them to make the changes independently, not necessarily by having a coach, say, do this, this, and this, because they know that, fundamentally it's built off their genes, their DNA, they're more likely to make positive lifestyle changes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's part of your personal feedback loop. But I was more curious as to, for instance, if you're taking a genetic look at hormone, like hormone predisposed to have high testosterone, low testosterone, whatever. Yeah. Can you infer that certain traits are going to be exhibited in that person's personality due to these DNA or these genetic predispositions?
I think what she's looking for is like if you have higher testosterone, are you going to be more aggressive, more reckless,
alpha,
like more alpha?
Yeah,
I can't.
Just testosterone as an example.
So you won't need a book that's like how to become the alpha, because if you if you have to read a book about how to become an alpha, you're not.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that whole thing with the becoming the alpha thing, what was it, about a year ago?
Yeah, we had a podcast
was
on it.
Fucking retarded. Like it was like somebody like got into it and just was like, and then you had a bunch of dudes running around like trying to be alpha males. I'm like, thank God I wasn't in a bar and some dude tried to hunt me from behind.
Well, I think that's Well, first of all, the best representation of someone who would consider to have high testosterone levels would be, say, a big muscular footballer, displaying the sort of the dominant behaviour and hyper stimulated by the desire to win, and training beyond points that points of pain that no one else can train past, no normal person can train past. But all of those things are not defined by testosterone. You could take some of those athletes and they would have very average levels of testosterone. Having super physiological levels of test naturally in the absence of performance enhancing drugs does not necessarily mean you're going to be like a huge guy. I can use myself as an example of this. I'm 6'1", 200 pounds, well, just under 200 pounds, so I'm not a particularly big guy, but I've got my testosterone levels a few weeks back were 1,157. The top end of normal is about 1,000, so I'm well over normal. But it's not having any super physiological effects in terms of sports performance or anything like that. So naturally high testosterone levels is not necessarily a defining factor for creating the so-called alpha male.
Sure.
The alpha male is I think I
remember usually has low testosterone.
Yeah. Well, do you remember the conversation we had where you said that fundamentally, like people like in CrossFit or anything like that, there must be something in their past that enables them to.
Well, yeah, I always joke that to be good at CrossFit, you got to be mad at yourself. You got to be like mad at your parents or try to hurt yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like Callie, when she goes out of CrossFit, is trying to get back at all those kids from third grade. So she embodies them, and then she's like, I'm going to get you back to this fuckers by hurting myself. So I'm like, Callie, it's okay. Like, third grade was difficult for you, but we'll get past it. No, I wrote a blog post about this, and I remember there was a pretty interesting research article I got sent that they went and they did actually testosterone and like kind of androgen hormone matching with different guys' personalities, and it was actually the guys that the higher testosterone were actually much more agreeable and nicer to be around, and that guys that had lower testosterone tend to be more abrasive, more dickish, or more what you would think of it. And so my comment was, like, if you run into a guy who's a total dick, there's a good chance that he just has low testosterone, and it's a terrible way to go through life, so he needs to go get checked. Maybe you should help him, and instead of being mad at him, just pity him. Because he's got low T. Yeah. And
that's just mind games. Hey, but seriously, Dan, I do wonder because given the fact that 99.9% of the human genome it's the same in every human everywhere, right? The genetic makeup is 99.9% the same, correct?
Yeah.
So we're taking a look at a very, very small percentage of our genetic makeup, and I'm curious as to when people are armed with information from the testing, what sort of changes do they really see? How significant are they in terms of athletic performance or health?
Yeah, well, I think the thing is that's a number that we have to be very careful with. So 99.99%, as in if you stand two people side by side, they both generally will develop a heart, they'll both develop a liver, they'll both develop two lungs, two kidneys, two adrenal glands, blah blah blah. But if you stand two people together and look at the differences, the phenotype, the physical differences, people are completely different. They look completely different. So that small percentage of variation is still a lot of genetic information. It's a mind-numbing amount of genetic information.
Well, do you want to compare Luke and I, and then we can actually see two people and compare some genetic makeups based on the muscles? All right. So, and guys, we can also post this up on the website so that you guys can see it and kind of go around with it, and so you guys can get an idea.
Wow, somebody's proud of their genetic makeup.
I'm not
Mr. High Testosterone.
I mean,
right.
I think it's very interesting.
It's like you got a report card back that was like A++.
Well, I mean, I really don't need a genetic test to give me my own report.
But here it is.
But it never hurts when people, we compete and everything. That's what I'm most upset that you guys drug your feet on getting your stuff done. Because I would like to see Callie's. Frankly, I want to see what Callie's testosterone score was.
I just got the testing materials like a couple days ago, and like I said, my mouth hasn't been clean for days, so I don't know.
I didn't drag my feet on sending it in. I sent that out. But what I'm curious
Is why I'm wearing your sunglasses?
My genetic is going to, yeah, you're wearing my sunglasses and drinking out of my water bottle for the last 3 weeks, so it could be my genetic material that is in here.
Well, the thing I'm worried about, and Doc confirmed this for me, Kelly, with you, that if they'll either be able to differentiate between your genetics and whoever else is in that saliva. So.
Yeah, stop it. That's not even funny. Listen. And obviously, when
you're laughing, but Kelly laughs at everything. So.
When you get my results back, you'll see that genetically, there's a lot of things about me that you wish you didn't know.
They're like, we've never ever seen anybody that had a genetic makeup similar to a muskrat.
We actually did have somebody who sent in 3 or 4 failed tests, and each time they came in, Sam's Dr. Sam Conville's one of the Fitness Genes co-founders. She's a PhD geneticist, and Sam kept saying to me, Dan, this is not human DNA. I'm sure this is human DNA.
All right, so on the very first top one, when you get your muscle genes results Fitness Genes results back, the very first one that they list up is the gene for caffeine metabolism. Now, Doc, why would the gene for caffeine metabolism, why would that be the very first one on the...
It was the last one that was released.
Okay, yeah. So this is just purely by accident.
Yeah, purely.
Okay, so the gene for caffeine metabolism, me personally, I'm AA, which is 2 copies of the fast caffeine metabolism, ALL, and I'm characterized as a fast caffeine metabolizer, which is true because I could drink a pot of coffee and in 10 minutes fall asleep, and I drink coffee before at night.
I've seen it.
Yeah. People are like, you're never going to be able to sleep. I'm like, I'll lay down right here after I pound this pound of coffee or gallon of coffee.
Yeah. And you kind of have to think what's happening there is because you metabolize it so quickly, caffeine gets broken down into 3 chemicals: paraxanthin, theobromine, and theophylline. And the paraxanthin has very similar effects to the caffeine. It crosses the blood-brain barrier, attaches to the adenosine receptors in the hypothalamus, and then that causes the release of corticotrophic releasing hormone that then stimulates the adrenal, the anterior pituitary to release ACTH. ACTH then stimulates the adrenal glands, so you get a release of cortisol and adrenaline, norepinephrine, and various other things. But when it happens really fast, it gets bound quickly, but then it gets dissociated fast as well. So the adenosine reattaches itself, and then that immediately has a sedative effect, and that's essentially, it's essentially you crashing. So the significance of knowing that information is really all to do with. So we're all told that caffeine is good for performance, but the thing is, no one ever looks at the genetic variations between people, relative to caffeine and performance.
Sure.
Because there are some people that will say, oh yeah, I have caffeine, before I go to the gym, and I just do better than when I don't have it. And there's other people that will not even bother because it just doesn't do anything. And generally, if you're a fast metabolizer of caffeine, there'll be very little performance enhancing effect of using caffeine.
Whereas on AC,
so AC, even though you've got a copy of the gene for fast caffeine metabolism, really AC and CC have a very normal rate of caffeine metabolism. Now, one thing I will say is that caffeine metabolism is only enhanced by pollutants. So, for example, your AA, you'd need to be in the presence of some form of pollutant. Now, whether it's environmental pollution, whether it's bad ingredients in a pre-workout, whether it's pollutants in coffee.
What about butter and MCT oil?
Don't just
because that's a fucking pollutant. That ruins coffee.
I was thinking Kahlua.
Oh, I like where your head at. I wonder if we can make a business around putting Kahlua in coffee and selling it to people as a performance enhancer.
Definitely try it.
Hey, what you need is a big dose of coffee and Kahlua every morning so that the rest of your day is magical.
That's all I needed to hear. That's all
a white Russian kind of thing. But yeah, so there needs to be a pollutant because essentially what's happening is the caffeine metabolism gene produces the enzyme CYP1A2. CYP1A2 is the metabolizer in the liver of caffeine. So anything that stimulates liver enzymes is potentially going to stimulate that enzyme to work faster. In terms of if you carry the normal variation, the normal metabolic speed, generally speaking, pollutants won't have an effect, and there's lots of research to show that. But the one thing that does have an effect that can speed up your rate of caffeine metabolism is cruciferous vegetables. So whereas if you carry the C version of the caffeine allele, you probably would get some performance benefits from using caffeine pre-workouts. Just make sure that you haven't consumed vegetables, in sort of 3 or 4 hour periods beforehand, and probably don't consume vegetables for a couple of hours after.
So I need to eat vegetables all day then, huh?
Cruciferous vegetables?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, like kale, broccoli,
Brussels sprouts.
Sprouts.
But the other significant thing with this as well is the way that you time if you're a coffee drinker, for example, making sure that you're not consuming coffee anywhere near workouts. So probably not even consuming coffee in the mornings. And really trying to get caffeine out of your diet as much as possible.
What about
if you're either regardless of your result or
no, just for me.
It's all about the fast metabolism.
Oh, so AA, you can't drink coffee.
I drink a little bit in the morning, cold coffee.
Is that 1 gallon jug you bring in?
Yes, and then I don't drink it anymore after Dan and I met. So I don't drink coffees. I used to drink it immediately after workout. Now I drink it in the afternoon, but the problem is it's like 100 degrees. So the last thing I want to do is have a real hot cup of coffee at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when it's 100 degrees in here. Thank God we got these Killcliff iced coffees.
Oh my God! Stop it.
We have, I mean, we can't stop drinking them.
Well, the issue with caffeine post workout, and this is really for anybody, is that whether you're a slow or fast metabolizer, you will get an increase in cortisol as a result of drinking coffee. After you've worked out, your cortisol levels are higher anyway.
Sure.
And there's really no reason to be pushing them up artificially. They're high in response to exercise. They need to be high in response to exercise, but they don't need to be exaggerated. So it's just really one of the reasons to avoid it. I was going to give you just one really interesting bit of information about this particular gene as well. And this is going on to a health topic. So the BRCA genes are the genes that give females an indication of the potential risks of breast cancer and ovarian cancer. If you carry the variation in the BRCA1 gene, increasing your risk of breast cancer, if you also if you're also either AC or CC for the CYP1A2 gene, if you drink more than 3 cups of coffee a day, you reduce your chances of breast cancer by as much as 68%.
There you go.
And that's because the CYP1A2 gene is not only to do with caffeine metabolism, it's also to do with the estrogen metabolism as well.
So Dan, I've actually heard about that BRCA gene. I listened to a podcast about it recently, and it's a fairly new insight, right?
Well, I mean, there's been research into the BRCA genes now for sort of 10, 15 years, and there's actually companies that all they do is specialize in BRCA gene and BRCA gene variations, and all of the oncology science around it. Mm-hmm. But certainly the thing with coffee has been over the last few years. So they've done things like where they've compared, giving females caffeine tablets and giving females coffee, and then looking at how that alters the morbidity from breast cancer. It shows that giving caffeine alone doesn't have the same effects as if you give coffee. So there's other chemicals in coffee, potential chemicals that are affecting the rate of the caffeine metabolism and also the rate of estrogen metabolism that could be having contributory effects. So even though all our research is focused on the performance-related effects or enhancing effects of caffeine, we also do a lot of research around the medical conditions as well, because obviously we like to extract the data from every possible source that we can.
Right. So what are some other results that we see? What's the next on the list?
ACTN3. This is the speed gene. This gene encodes for A-actinine
alpha-actin
3, a protein.
Maybe we just let Dan tell us what the shit this stuff is.
Go fuck yourself. So basically, this is the speed gene. This is the one that gives you a greater baseline of strength and a protective effect against muscle damage and increase in fast-twitch muscle fibers.
So both John and Luke have R versions for the actin-3 gene. So actin-3 is essentially produces the protein alpha-actinin, and what alpha-actinin does, it has structural properties, but it also has properties where it seems to have an effect at signaling fast-twitch muscle. So when you look at elite sprinters, elite power athletes, long jumpers, at, sort of a world championship Olympic level, pretty much, I mean, you should never use the words always and never, so I'm not going to say always and never, but the majority of people in that group will have at least one copy of the R allele for the actin-3 gene. And it seems to be, as I say, that there's more fast-twitch muscle activation. And the significance of this really is all to do with sort of recovery and frequency. So we use some of the information that we get from actin-3 gene results to be able to give people information about how often they should train and how often they should train and how much rest they should be taking during their training sessions as well. So there's with actin-3, there's the R version and the X version of the allele. If you carry 2 copies of the X version of the allele, it shows that you have an increased risk from very, very intense exercise of rhabdomyolysis. So on that basis, you know that when you're periodizing or constructing training programs for people who are XX, you need to make sure that if they're new to exercise, you do periodize the training very sensibly. Make sure you give them enough rest between training days, and make sure you give them enough rest within the training sessions to recover enough to be able to move on to the next set, and also make sure their nutrition is right. So just an example of how you can use that type of information to personalize and periodize training programs.
So now John has 2 copies of the R.
Yeah.
And I have an RX.
Yeah.
So that indicates that I have a what?
So at the end of the day, there's a lot of people out there that will try and bullshit you on, and
sure,
my opinion is that if you're RR and you're RX, the fact that you're producing alpha-actinin is, there really is no quantifiable difference, in my opinion, between the values of alpha-actinin in the blood from whether you have 2 copies or 1 copy. Okay. So you produce alpha-actinin, therefore you are getting a fairly reasonable anabolic signaling or signaling to fast-twitch muscle, and I don't think it would be a little bit absurd for us to try and quantify.
So, but would you say that since I have a copy of the X variation, that I can do something that John can't? Like, what do I got here? What do I got on top
of X-ray vision?
Now we're talking about language.
Could he give himself rhabdomyolysis where I can't? Like I'm immune to rhabdo?
But nobody's immune to rhabdomyolysis. And to be perfectly honest with you, if we're talking about rhabdomyolysis in sport, the people that I know who've suffered from rhabdomyolysis are they're freaking nutters. Like, they are nutters. They get to the point where they're in that much pain, from the training session, but yet they find another gear to keep going.
Yeah.
That's what it takes to get rhabdomyolysis from sport. In the world generally, typically the people that get rhabdomyolysis are old people that, before they go to bed, fall on the floor, spend 12 hours on the floor, someone finds them in the morning, and that's just long enough for them to go into rhabdomyolysis and then start to get, myoglobin and kidney dysfunction, all that sort of stuff. But in sport, as a result of sport, it's very, very difficult. So, but what we do know is that people who are XX, they tend to represent more the people that get rhabdomyolysis as a result of ridiculous training, as compared to people that can have at least 1 hour.
Good. The next one up is for PPARA, which is the gene for fat burning. We have a number of energy sources to draw upon when exercising, depending on how long and how intense the exercise is. The 3 main ones are glucose, carbohydrates, and fat. Fat is most efficiently energy source, and gene encodes for a protein that enables a more efficient switch between burning carbohydrates and burning fats for fuel, and that's obviously that metabolic system where you can actually transition between carbohydrate and fat depending on the exercise needs.
Yes, yeah. So I think the significance of this is really, and I actually, so we're talking about individual genes at the moment, and we're talking about individual genes because it's actually much more interesting for your audience to hear this kind of information. When it actually comes down to the way we deliver the trait-based information, it's based on multiple gene interactions. and multiple gene interactions can actually slightly alter outcomes. But just for general interest purposes, that's why we're talking about individual genes here at the moment. But the PPAR alpha gene, the significance really is, and again, if we go back to generic principles, we're in an age now where everyone generally will get told, you need to get rid of your carbohydrates or completely drop your carbohydrates. Mm-hmm. Now, there's no reason for everybody to completely drop the carbohydrates. There's definitely some people that benefit from particularly low carbohydrates, and there's other people that just really don't need to drop the carbohydrates all that much in terms of when you look at macronutrient ratios. The reason being that if you can efficiently switch to fat metabolism, then the carbohydrates in your diet are not necessarily going to be significant at sort of reducing your ability to burn body fat. If you don't switch easily, i.e. your body has a much more of a preference to really focus on using carbohydrates for fuel, then you're somebody that almost certainly needs to probably fairly significantly lower your carbohydrate consumption just to try and promote fat oxidation as much as possible. Obviously, it's training dependent as well. You need to think about your pre-workout nutrition, your post-workout nutrition, to maximise your periods of fat loss. Thinking about high-intensity interval training and all that sort of stuff. But this is really just if you were going to give a macronutrient framework, that this is the type of information that could really contribute to building a good quality framework. And one of the things that we've found with the people that we've worked with is more often than not we're getting people come into us who. We've had people come to us who've been on like less than 10% carbohydrates a day, for like 3 months or 6 months or something. So, and if we're saying, okay, you could probably tolerate 35-40% carbs, we're then in the process where we're having to gradually build up their carbohydrates consumption back again. Because the other problem is when you remove carbohydrates, you promote insulin resistance. Mm-hmm. Another reason why you have to be very careful on the people that you're selecting to all of a sudden crash lower. That gradual increase in carbohydrates, gradually, promotes, you're going to almost certainly be more insulinogenic in that early process of building up your carbs again. But ultimately, hopefully, you'll get back to what is your kind of what you're wired for, if you like. And then you can be much healthier in the way you ensure that you have a better body composition and a better lean body mass.
So I'm a GG, which is more commonly found in elite endurance athletes, would be expected by chance.
Yeah.
Luke is a CG, and it looks like the CLA is a much more rare one that is for speed and power athletes.
Yeah. So generally with a lot of the genes that we look at, they're genes where they've been part of studies part of our studies where we've looked at kind of overall sort of sporting characteristics as well. So in terms of the trait models, these genes play big parts in the trait models when we're looking at power tendencies and strength tendencies or endurance tendencies. But I personally have a much greater interest in PPAR for the nutritional parts of it. Mm-hmm. And the nutritional recommendations, because I think it's a much more significant gene for the way you can help people with their nutritional goals.
So then based off of our results, how should John and I what should we be doing differently?
So John and I we had quite a long chat about this, didn't we? So first of all, again, careful not to give generic information here. So if we give specific information for John, so I know, for example, John trains early in the morning. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we spoke about was how John can gradually start to quite slowly increase his carbohydrate consumption, but focus the carbohydrate consumption around training. So before he goes to bed at night, have a higher carbohydrate base meal than perhaps he's used to, mm-hmm. so that when he's getting up in the morning, there's already some digested carbohydrates, so there's a decent source of energy that is going to enhance his performance. And then consuming the carbohydrates then post-workout as well means that you're focused on improving your performance, and you're also focused on improving your recovery, mm-hmm. and you're therefore using the carbohydrates at those effective times. and then through the rest of the day, over the passage of time, experimenting, putting small amounts of carbohydrates into various meals, and then overall trying to step up to probably a ratio of between 30 and 40% carbohydrates. But again, because if you've been off carbohydrates for so long, then it might be that you might not get back up to those levels before you might get up to 30% and you go to 32%, and all of a sudden you're putting on body fat, or you start to feel tired. Whereas at 30%, you're feeling like a trooper. And again, some anecdotal information, but I know some bodybuilders who followed pretty much carbohydrate-free diets for some time now, like 1, 2, 3 years, and haven't put a pound of muscle on. They just haven't put any muscle on, and they're kicking themselves because they've done like one of our tests, and they're like, I knew I should have stuck with carbs, but you just get programmed to see some of the common trends. And the common trends make sense, but what you have to remember is they make sense for certain people. Like when people, the fitness world and the sports performance world, everyone's always arguing about which diet's best. And the inventors of these diets, they work, but they work for the people that they work for. Yeah, they work for, right? Yeah. So you don't, 95% of diets fail, full stop. It's huge. So only 5% of diets are ever successful. And we only ever hear about the successful ones, and therefore, we become focused on especially, with people with very loud voices in social media, and they're the ones that we then cling to, but they're not necessarily the best ones for us.
Dan, fine-tuning your diet through this newfound knowledge, that aside, I mean, how many environmental factors can sabotage your ability to really optimize that new knowledge, right? So like people with metabolic derangement, hormonal issues, adrenal fatigue. I mean, those things to me sound like very, very significant saboteurs of this whole process, right?
Well, the thing is, everything you've just described is self-sabotage. Because all of those things you've just described are things where people have, you inflict them on yourselves. So, so I'm a medical doctor by background, and I was a practicing doctor for 10 years. And so it's always very hard for me to talk about things like adrenal fatigue because it's not a recognized medical condition. So I have to take the symptoms that people are describing and then think about, okay, so what is it that you're describing? So assuming that what you mean is overstimulation of the adrenals by perhaps consuming too much caffeine or, things like that, I think that we have to remember that our body is infinitely more intelligent than we are. And it's very difficult for us there are things that we can do that potentially will sabotage, our bodies, but our bodies will correct themselves if we present them with the right environment. So if you reduce...
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that I appreciate the sentiment that you're getting at, but, from our background, having worked with people numerous times, thousands of people over the course of seminars, what I'm basically saying is that you can arm people, and I understand from a medical standpoint, these are self-sabotaging behaviors, right? But I guess my point is that a big hurdle I can already see, and I'm not trying to say anything negative, but I can see people thinking that this is the way to optimize their performance, and yet they're doing so many other activities and incorporating other behaviors outside of this that are going to have such a negative effect that it becomes almost like insignificant if they were to, for instance, start to up their carbohydrate intake or optimize some of these biomarkers that you're talking about, right?
Well, I think what we're now getting into is the topic of the importance of performance relative to the importance of longevity and health. And where I come from is my only interest is improved performance with improved quality of life and improved health. So can you, for example, maximize muscle hypertrophy, but yet still be healthy and still be promoting things that are going to hopefully lengthen your life? And the answer is yes, you can, by using genetic information to essentially take out all the things that you're doing that don't make any scientific sense, and then start to incorporate the things that have some degree of science or some degree of research that means it makes sense, and then, start to just rejig things a little bit. I mean, it's, a good example is if we look at, say, sports supplements. I know people that are taking bucket loads on a daily basis of sports supplements. I can pretty much guarantee that probably hardly any of them are having any effect whatsoever. And the point is, there are certainly some nutritional ingredients that are required and will have an effect on people, but not the bucket loads of things that people are using. I use the example of if you look at guys that made it in the NFL, for example, they didn't grow up on sports supplements. They grew up eating food. If you look at professional athletes, most professional athletes aren't using any supplements. They eat food. They don't diet. They train hard. The process of dieting alone is something that has an impact negatively on our metabolism. So there's so many. For the majority of people, there's so many restorative measures that you have to make, and the way you make those restorative measures is by removing all of the things that don't make any sense and just building on the things that make a lot of sense. And so I'm working with some some pretty big athletes at the moment, and the huge chance that they've had to take is me saying, there's things here that it just doesn't make sense, and I think we just take it away from your diet, remove this from your training, and let's focus on these things. And you almost have to sort of go back to basics a little bit, because if you look at, say, muscle hypertrophy, go back to the era of the old bodybuilders, in the 50s, 60s, 70s. These guys were building lots of muscle, but the only thing that they were doing differently to, say, bodybuilders today was they were eating a lot more food, and they weren't using hardly any supplements. They were using, obviously, anabolic steroids, but that's no different to what's happening today.
They haven't invented the new drugs since 1956.
No, they haven't.
It just so happened that the best drugs that they invented were the best ones that came out.
Exactly. Or if you look at all of them on steroids now, they're just generally derivatives of anabol.
Or cholesterol or testosterone. Yeah.
Speaking of hypertrophy, did you guys get some genetic testing for that?
Yeah, so in terms of the thing with muscle hypertrophy is that muscle hypertrophy is a huge topic, and there's no one thing that sort of that we can say this is going to mean this is going to happen, because muscle hypertrophy is a huge model to interpret. One of the genes that we test for, though, is the myostatin gene and variations in the myostatin gene. So myostatin is a negative regulator of skeletal muscle growth, and there's a few different gene variations that we test for. The most rare gene variation is one that really hasn't been found in that many humans, actually, but it's the one that theoretically would lead to uncontrolled skeletal muscle growth. So if you look at, for example, the blue bull or the Pierre Montanese bull, they're examples of myostatin deficient cows or bulls, where they get something called double muscling, which is where they get essentially muscle on muscle because they've got unregulated skeletal muscle growth.
Did you see the set of testicles on this bull? Every time I see a picture, I'm like, God damn it.
Yeah, you can post that. But a really good example, a good animal example of the significance of the myostatin gene. Do you guys know the dog whippets? So obviously whippets are used for racing, and if you have a whippet which doesn't have any gene variations for the myostatin gene, it's generally not very good at racing. If you have a whippet that has 2 copies of the myostatin variation, it's actually called something called a bullhead, because it ends up as a really wide-faced, wide whippet, and that's useless as well. If you have a whippet that has 1 copy of the myostatin variation and 1 normal copy, they're generally the whippets that win all the races. So being heterozygous for the myostatin gene in whippets and also racehorses is positive for performance. Now in humans, as I say, with the very rare variation, there's very few reported cases. The most famous case was a young lad called Liam Poistra. And Liam Poistra was, I think he was Russian, either Russian or Eastern European. And at a very young age, he had, in terms of when you compared him to people his own age, when he was 3 years old, he had the strength of like an 8-year-old, and he was able to do the same number of pull-ups as an 8-year-old, and he had a ridiculously low body fat and all these sort of things. So there's the potential that very rare variation leads to strength-related benefits as well as body composition benefits. When you look at the less rare variation, which is the K153R variation, there's studies that show that in females that carry this variation have a 60% greater response to resistance training compared to females that don't. And we actually gene tested a girl who in 2011 she decided she wanted to be a powerlifter. So she was a gymnast growing up, and she decided she wanted to be a powerlifter. And within 12 months, she was world champion. And interestingly, we gene tested her last year, and she has 2 copies of the myostatin variation for the less rare one, which is, even though it's less rare, it's still hardly anyone has it.
So she was an RR.
She was an RR, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So there were definitely there are definitely genes that research as we research more and more, we're going to play a part in muscle hypertrophy. But the issue is, I mean, I'm sure you've probably all heard about companies releasing myostatin inhibiting supplements and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the problem with that is that myostatin is not the only negative regulator of skeletal muscle. So if you knock out myostatin, there's the potential upregulation of other negative regulators as well. So it's a bit of a grey area. But in terms of genes around muscle hypertrophy, there's a whole host of genes that we test for that when we look at sort of the process of muscle hypertrophy, where we create predictions on how people can best optimize how fast, the efficiency they build muscle by looking at, so for example, time and attention. When you break down time and attention and the components of time and attention, you can look at the gene variations around some of the specific components of that. And then when you optimize those components and you enhance people's overall benefits they get from time and attention, you can potentially enhance hypertrophy. So there's a ton of stuff.
All right. So for the next one, we have
the endurance gene.
Yeah, the ACE gene.
Okay, so the ACE gene is interesting. ACE stands for angiotensin converting enzyme. It's part of a big system in the body that's it's kind of a connection between the lungs, the kidneys, blood pressure, sodium potassium regulation, the renin-angiotensin system, and there's a whole big process in the body that ACE is to do with. But ACE is also a gene that's been studied in athletes, and there's 2 variations of the ACE gene that we test, that we analyze for. There's the I version and the D version, and it's the I version that seems to give people an advantage when it comes to endurance-related sports. So
Malik,
I have no IG.
So there's studies that have been carried out where they looked at, for example, mountain climbers, and people that ascend to quite high levels. And generally speaking, most people, if you don't carry at least one I version of the ACE gene, it's very difficult for you to ascend to above 8,000 feet. Mm-hmm. And the reason is that unless you have at least one copy of the I version of the allele, you don't function well in oxygen restricted states. Hence why at high altitudes, generally speaking, you can't function very well at high altitudes. So the I version is linked to endurance capabilities. The D, whereas if you don't carry a copy of the I version, so for example, if you're DD, that's generally much more represented in athletes that do shorter burst activities, so strength, power, powerlifters, things like that. And there seems to be whereas perhaps a bit eye allele, there's more of a tendency to activation of slow twitch muscle. There isn't that same propensity for the DDs.
So for the listeners, John is a DD, has absolutely no propensity for slow twitch support, whereas I contain an I and a D, which means I get the best of both worlds and I'm fucking elite.
Yeah.
Right?
Elite. I think that's what it means.
That's what Doc said.
So you're fucking elite. You can keep all that noise. I don't want to ever go to 8,000 feet. The next one we have is the PGC1A, which is the gene for aerobic capacity.
Yeah, so this is so we have big collections of genes, like I say, that essentially build into the endurance and aerobic capacity type model. This is one of the genes that really enhances that model, and again, it's more of the propensity towards slow twitch muscle activation rather than fast twitch. And also increased likelihood of being able to improve your VO2 max. So generally people that have the GG versions of this gene have a better capability of increasing their VO2 max as people who are the other variations SS.
All right, well, John, I am GG. We are the same on this one.
Yeah.
So that's good. It means we're both elite endurance athletes, as it pertains to GC1A. For the next one, we have this looks like an interleukin 15 RA, which would be a receptor A, which would be the gene for muscle volume.
Yeah.
And let's go with that one.
Yeah, so the interesting thing here is that there are people out there that, and I'm sure your listeners, there'll be some of your listeners that can testify to this as well. Some people can build muscle, but they just don't get strong with it. Mm-hmm. Whereas there are other people that build muscle and they get strong at the same time. And there's obviously, there's a number of gene variations that contribute to this, but one of the gene variations that we look at that can give a little bit of information about this and the reasons for this is interleukin 15 receptor alpha. So what you tend to find is that people that have two copies of let me just check the screen on this because so you're AA.
That's right. I'm AA.
And you're AC. Yes. Okay, so John's AC. So what that means is that when John's sort of muscles are growing and they're hypertrophying, there's essentially two ways that muscles can hypertrophy. They can hypertrophy through the laying down of new myofibrils, and so you get muscle myofibrillar growth. But also you can get an increase in the volume within muscle cells as well. So you can get sort of cytoplasmic or increase in sort of sarcomeres. So it's essentially a cytoplasmic growth. So you carry copies of the gene variation, which means that when you put on muscle, you also generally get strong at the same time. So you don't like if you were looking at, say, the way you periodize your training. People that don't necessarily get strong as they build muscle, because that's not a good thing, right? Yeah. If you're building muscle and you're not building strength at the same time, there is going to be a knock-on effect to that isn't good. So for those types of people, you really want to make sure that as part of their training, you're periodizing good periods of strength training. Whereas for the people that don't have, so people like me, where I don't have the variations, that basically when I build muscle, I just don't get strong. So the only way I can get strong is by incorporating strength training. And even then, I don't ever really, get massive sort of strength gains. And
your result AA would mean.
So you're AA. Actually, let me ask you, when you build muscle, have you ever done a bodybuilding program before?
Yes.
And what happened when you did that?
First off, it was also paired up with an extremely hypercaloric diet.
Yeah.
Put on a ton of weight and got much stronger.
Yeah. So with your variations, you would expect that. So you're AA, so you would expect to be able to build muscle, and at the same time, you would expect to be able to that you'll get some strength increases as well. Whereas with me, I'm the opposite.
Cool. Nice. I'm getting jacked.
All right, the next one we have is UCP2, which is has to deal with the gene for metabolism.
Yeah. So again, we're talking about individual genes, and we don't work based on individual genes, but just some interesting bits of information. So you've heard people talk about having fast metabolisms and slow metabolisms, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. But actually, when people talk about fast metabolism, what they actually mean is they mean an inefficient metabolism. That is that the foods that they're consuming, they're not storing as energy, they're essentially losing as heat. Because the UCP genes, or the uncoupling genes, it's a reaction that occurs on the mitochondria that essentially converts energy into stored energy, or converts sort of calories into stored energy. So if you're not storing energy, i.e. you're not storing it in fat or in muscle or anything like that, and you're losing it as heat, your metabolism's inefficient. Whereas if you have an efficient metabolism, the foods that you consume, you're gonna store them as energy. So, for example, you, Luke, you carry the VV versions, which means that you're what general people would deem to have a slow metabolism. Uh-huh. But what you actually have is an efficient metabolism,
which means the food I eat, I use as energy.
You store it as energy. Yeah. So that VV. So that means for someone like you, when you consider dieting, calories are important, because if you overconsume calories, you're not going to lose body fat. Yeah. Whereas, for example, and really that would be the same with you as well.
Yeah,
if you even though you're AV would still tend to represent a more normal sort of metabolic rate. So it's the same thing with you, that when you're dieting, you still need to think about calories. If you overconsume calories, it's going to be difficult to lose body fat. I'm AA, which means that I have an inefficient metabolism. And generally speaking, for me, calorie consumption isn't that reflective of my ability to gain weight or lose weight.
Okay. So that you would be the proverbial hard gainer, or you would have it.
I can eat all day and never gain a pound.
Yeah. Yeah, potentially. Yeah. And it's really important to kind of to sieve these people out, because it can be very disheartening for them. Mm-hmm. What you're saying, eat more, and all that happens is they end up eating loads and feeling pretty shitty. Mm-hmm. And actually, these are the people where you actually really need to take a much harder, solid look at their training.
Yeah, the training's going to have a bigger influence on their ability to gain weight.
And their pre- and post-workout nutrition. Okay. The times where, the energy you're giving them to train and then the energy you're giving them to repair, they're things to really focus on.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. For the next one, we have a lactose intolerance gene.
Yeah, so they're the ones that we talked about earlier.
Yeah. So I'm TT, which means I'm lactose tolerant. Yeah. And Luke is?
I believe I'm TT as well.
Luke are TT, so we can crush dairy.
That's why we've been drinking milk in 110-degree weather, a la Ron Burgundy.
Oh,
milk was a bad choice.
Okay, so this is the one that I think is the funniest of all of the genes that we tested. Yeah. The FTO gene, which for those of you guys that are plugged in know, they were able to assess a gene that gave you a risk for obesity by a mechanism where your body won't sense that it's full. I think it's through releasing of ghrelin. So I am TT, which means that I have 2 copies of the normal obesity gene, which would make sense because I eat and I get full, and then I'm like, I can't eat anymore. Whereas Luke, on the other hand, is AT, and which makes total sense because Luke Summers is quite possibly the most impressive eater.
Oh, thank you.
I've ever been around. Yay! And anybody here on this podcast, including those coaches, know Luke can not only fucking destroy food, but he can do it at a rate which I've never seen anybody do.
And enjoy it.
I mean, we did an eating challenge in Utah. This is early on when Luke and I first met. We went to Utah for a seminar, and there was a 12-egg omelet, pound of hash browns, 32 ounces of milk. I mean, it was a fucking mess of food, and he crushed it in 12 minutes and was like, anything else? And I literally couldn't even get through my omelet. I'm like, I'm so full. And but he is impressive.
Now, is that indicative the AT, could that be indicative of, or my ability to do that? Let's say
like eat like 7 bags of chips in my house.
Or like you said, there's all sorts of mechanisms I'm sure at play here.
Yeah. So the most significant thing about having an A variation is the tendency to overeat. Mm-hmm. Because what you're describing there is overeating.
100%. So we were talking about it this morning.
Yeah, exactly. So
he'll come over, like I told you this, like we'll like invite like people over to the house, and my wife, if she knows Luke is coming, we'll go out and buy like 7 times the normal amount of food, because she's like, my wife's like big thing is like, well, we don't ever want to run out of food. She's like, well, Luke's coming, so come on with all. What'd you buy all this food for? She's like, well, Luke's coming. I'm like.
And didn't you guys realize that one day, like, she kept getting normal amounts of food, and then I didn't make it one weekend or something? You're like, why is there so much leftovers?
Yeah, like she's like, why did we make like 7 pounds of this? I'm like, well, Luke didn't show. She's like, oh, he's impressive eating.
Yeah, but this is important because again, if let's say for example you're looking at how you sort of program people's diets,
mm-hmm.
if especially in sports performance, I mean, the last thing you want to do is if you're a footballer or a basketball player or athlete, whatever, you don't want people gaining weight unnecessarily.
Sure.
And if you give them a free rein to just have high, really calorie dense foods and they're overeating them, then it's not going to enhance their performance by nature of the change in their body composition.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, at the beginning, John was talking about at Baylor when there was the guys asking him, why do you look like you do? And then he was looking at them and they're on exactly the same diets. If you've got people with these variations and, you're giving them massive amounts of calories and they're equivalent calories to the person sat next to them, and they're essentially overeating, their performance will never improve because their body composition is never going to improve.
Right, it won't allow them to.
It just won't allow them to, but you also need to know the people that you can feed high amounts of calories to, and that it's not going to have any detrimental effect. For example, if someone said to me, Dan, you only have to eat 1 meal a day. You can eat a 1,500, 2,000 calorie meal, just one a day, and that's all you need to do, and your body composition will be fine, everything will be fine. If someone said that to me, I'd be really happy.
Me too.
I'd be so happy.
Fuck, wouldn't that be nice? Only to eat 1 meal a day.
Yeah. Get on with the rest of my day, not think about food, just, I think it'd be amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the research is going. It's going to go to the point where we can say to people, do you know what, all you need to do is this and you'll be good. And that's essentially where we're taking things.
And this is the starting point, right?
This is the gateway.
Yeah, so I guess what's super
He's
cool
genetic hacking it. He's genome hacking it.
Hashtag genome hacking.
Yeah, right.
Genome hacking.
But so like I think what John and I committed to do just a couple days ago is, take a look at these results and work with you to tailor something to follow for 6 weeks instead of 22.
Yeah.
Maybe 6-12 weeks and see where it takes us.
Yeah, definitely. We should definitely do that.
Yeah, we talked about it with like sets and reps and trying to volume and training and kind of how it is, because on this he makes if you go up to the top, there's a blueprint that you can hit where on the blueprint. So these are obviously the results, and then Doc goes through and gives you some training strategies. For me, on the frequency as an advanced lifter, which I'm pretty sure I'll take the advanced one because I'm advanced in age, you should aim to hit each muscle group about twice per week. The example would be 4-day upper lower body split, a push-pull leg split, where each muscle group gets trained at least once every third or fourth day. And then he makes a volume recommendation. I am a low volume guy, which puts me at 16 to 22 sets per workout with like 8 to 15 reps with a 90 to for like minute and a half to 2 minute work to rest work. And then he also lists tempo, which is like, for me, it's basically move the weight as fast as possible at all times, which we figured out long ago. And because of my genetic makeup, periodization is not really as important. And then for me, with I need to do some form of HIIT training and involved with some form of active recovery work is pretty much what he's recommended for me. Whereas Luke, by contrast, is somewhere in like 16 to 32 sets, 12 to 15 reps. So he's a high volume guy. and he gets
more
less
frequent work rate.
Yeah, so he has less rest between sets. He also has a compensatory acceleration prescription for bar speed, and he actually.
Then I'd be more sensitive to switching stimulus or periodizing my training.
Well, yeah, he needs to periodize his training a little bit more, whereas I think I have a little more training frequency, because of the recovery deal where I know. And then also there's a hit and cardio recommendation too, so pretty interesting. And then if you scroll down a little bit,
the significance, just so you know, of the hit and the cardio is this is more. So this is perhaps a little bit more geared towards the general population. So
this isn't us.
This is I was going to say, and the significance of this is if you have a tendency to store body fat, for example, cardio can be a very useful tool, or it can be detrimental. Mm-hmm. So a small amount of cardio can be incredibly useful.
Like 3 days a week. We talked about this, just being able to do active recovery days, like 30 to 45 minutes.
And that was absolutely
like 60-70% of your target heart rate just getting in. I disguise it on Field Strong and Power Athlete and Jack Street, all this is active recovery work.
Yeah.
But it's basically increased mitochondrial density, cell volumization.
Yeah.
It's just building an aerobic base, which it has always been talked about. You can go through Super Training, you can look and talk about all these different, sports scientists talk about building an aerobic base, and then they're about 12 years ago, everybody started shitting on that, and everybody's saying, fuck that, and you get into more of a concurrent training. But I definitely think there's a case to be able to do some conditioning.
And that was probably one of my biggest failures when we did our 22-week challenge, which was the hypertrophy program. Bodybuilding and hypercaloric is I did little to no cardio.
He did none. When he said little, he meant none.
No, like tying my shoes.
His cardio was walking to and from the out of the gym, whereas I did 3 to 4 days a week of 30 to 45 minutes.
Yeah, but your objective was also to lose weight.
But I ended up putting on like 10 pounds of muscle or something crazy, and it was interesting. I was gaining muscle and getting stronger when I was doing the cardio, which made no fucking sense to me in terms of what we know of strength conditioning, that you start talking about conversion of fast twitch, slow twitch muscle fibers, and you look at it. But at the end of the day, when I created a bigger aerobic base and I got in terms of better cardiovascular shape, my fucking squat went through the roof and all my lifts went through the roof. And then when we got off the program, I stopped doing it and I watched all my lifts come down.
Yeah. But you can, so for example, when you look at muscle hypertrophy, so one of the contributing factors to muscle hypertrophy is, or when you look at, say, time of attention, is also the oxygen requirements. So if you can push your oxygen use higher, then potentially that has an effect on the metabolic stress that you apply, whether you increase it or reduce it in the periods where you're applying time with attention principles. So you could VO2 max, changes in VO2 max, it can have a very positive effect on hypertrophy and strength increases for some people. Mm-hmm. Other people, it will have little to no effect. So I had always hated the idea. Just the word cardio is to me fucking packaged up with core. Yeah. It's kind of like you made a joke earlier that we've been saying for years. Yeah. Athletes lift weights, they train, and they eat. Yeah. Other people diet and exercise. Yeah. To me, diet and exercise was the civvies, the civilians. Whereas athletes, you eat, you train, you lift weights, and you fucking bang.
Do your job.
And you do your job. Yeah. So for me, I just always looked at it. But when we got into the 22 Jack Street, I knew I needed to create some form of caloric deficit to really get where I needed to go, which was 10% weight loss. And I know I needed to do it, so I was like, well, shit, I'll just kind of go back to some of the classic bodybuilding stuff. And I watched all of my lifts go through the fucking roof, and I was like, the only thing which was hard is having to mentally get on that fucking machine and pedal and ride, or the stair stepper. Callie and I would be on this step mill, and I just wanted to literally cut my wrist, so it's pretty hard.
Callie was a big step mill fan.
Huge step mill fan.
Callie had a personal conflict going on with the Step Queen. When we were training at the 12, there was a gal in there who
crushed.
she literally would set the thing on the highest level and sprint up it. Like, she could have sprinted up Mount Everest.
And bound around, and
it was unreal. Like, she was like dancing on it, going sideways up and down.
You'll have to remind me, what was my personal conflict with her?
That you wanted to be her or be with her.
Oh yeah.
Well, I thought at one point you wanted to wear her skin, but no, it was like a Wild Bill style. No, I mean, so Callie and I would go in there, we get on the step mill, and like we're on like level, I don't know, 2 or 3, just kind of trotting along, and this chick's on like 25, sprinting past us.
Doing
and I remember being like,
twirls.
This broad. So Callie was actually really friendly. I tried to push her off it every time I saw her.
This has just been such a super cool learning experience, because I think one of the more profound things you said earlier was just that, like, we can base everything now in science. We're at a point now where this stuff is so accessible. The testing is so accessible that people can stop making, like, quote unquote educated guesses or observational science type work, and they can really just get down to the nuts and bolts of what kind of training is going to be effective.
That's right. Yeah. No. Absolutely. That's absolutely the stage that we're at now, and it's incredibly interesting. You know, kind of where it's heading as well. I mean, we're now, as mentioned earlier, we're doing a lot of collaborative work with universities. You know, big universities, and we've got some amazing projects on the go. And even internally within the company, we've got some really, really great research projects. You know, and we're hoping to answer some really interesting questions. Mm-hmm. One of the questions that we're really looking to answer at the moment is, what is it that actually makes when you look, you know, who are going to be the best athletes in school, you know, and you know, they come out of school and, you know, they get through all the training camps and the drafts and into the, you know, NFL or whatever, and it's always predictable. You know, you can look at those people and you know who they're going to be, but yet they just eat food and they train hard and they eventually get there. Whereas there's other people that don't, and they do everything they possibly can to try and get there, training wise, nutrition wise, supplement wise, and they never do. And we'd really like to start to try and figure out those answers. Mm-hmm. And I can't say too much about it at the moment, but we've made a bit of a breakthrough on something. And
this is the objective would be to just crush young children's dreams and let them know out of the gate that they're not going to make it.
Well, not really. No, it's really more. It's really more to do with
empowering them.
No, this isn't to do with children. This is adults. Okay. So this is about if you've got adults that, you know, they want to get in shape or they want to become better at sports, how they're making the selection to decide what they should do is essentially the issue at the moment. Mm-hmm. Because if let's say, for example, you've got somebody who look at person X, mm-hmm. and they say, I'm going to do what person X does, and what person X does is eat loads of food, trains really hard, and they never get anywhere. But then they go and follow person Y, and what person Y does is eat moderate amount of food, you know, trains hard, takes a load of supplements, and then they get there. How do you decide which person you should follow? And what we're looking to do now is to figure out some of the answers to that question. And we've got some very, very good hypotheses around it. One which has been quite recent that we're just about to start a research project in. But yeah, so the way this is all advancing is pretty incredible.
So Dan, how can people find out information on Fitness Genes?
They can a number of ways. You can go to fitnessgenes.com, and on fitnessgenes.com we have all the information on there about how the science works and all that sort of stuff. You can go onto our sort of social media pages. So we have facebook.com/fitnessgenes, Twitter /fitnessgenes. We've got Instagram. We've got the Fitness Genes account on Instagram. If you want some more specific information about, so for example, how John and I are working together, you can go on to fitnessgenes.com /powerathlete. And there's going to be, and you'll go on there and you'll see some really good information about how we're working with the guys down here, because we're all about collaborating with beasts in the gym. That's what we're into.
And
we provide the science and they provide the beastliness.
What's interesting is we get hit up quite a bit on products of varying claims, and but I'd say very few actually send their CEO down to the gym to fucking bang weights with us and get under a safety squat bar and fold. Like we banged some serious weights this morning. It's awesome to have Dan out. And, when we first met with Dan, I think we had scheduled an hour or so, and then
like
literally
4.5 hours
5 hours later. I mean, just such a fruitful conversation. I just walked by it a couple times because I was on a couple different calls, and I'm like, you guys are still fucking talking. Like, we gotta get Dan on podcast. This is gonna be a good one.
Yeah. No, it was good. We did a little safety bar squat today with some chains on it, and I don't know if Dan has ever noticed or felt his having to lock in his upper back in the squat, but it was pretty awesome to watch him come out of the bottom and watch the safety squat pull him forward, and then all of a sudden see that light go on and then figure out the breathing. So it was cool to see somebody come in and try something new, and it kind of fixes some things, because he'd mentioned like talking about trying to get his squat up, and the safety bar squat for us is a really, really fun tool.
Yeah,
because it fucking teaches you how to like lock your upper back in. And we watch guys all the time that are like, oh, this thing is great, and then all of a sudden it just like topples you over, and you're like, oh.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And then when you go back to squat with a straight bar, all of a sudden you understand about how to like create stability in that upper torso.
Exactly. But then this is a good example of how we like to work. Because we're a scientific company, and everyone knows in science, the best science comes out of the way you work with research groups. But you should never forget that research extends into the science of training itself with real athletes. Mm-hmm. So our being able to train with you guys, teaches us as much as if we go to a research group and they tell us what's going on in the petri dish. It's really important to know the balance of those two elements. Because if you get one wrong, you essentially build a product that's no good. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that everyone understands. Look, listen, we're working with the best people, the best people in training, the best people in science, and that's how we've built the best product. And and it's that's where we are.
No, I mean, you made a great comment earlier that we went on. I want to come back to, and we've known this. I mean, obviously we understand the physiology, how it would work with athletes, and the science behind it. But at the end of the day, there's anecdotal things that you come across that you notice that are almost more insightful. And that to me is, and even though, observation isn't necessarily science, it's just kind of observing. Some of the biggest breakthroughs that we've ever seen in training, just watching people do things.
I totally agree.
Where all of a sudden you ask somebody to do something and they can't do it, and you're like, wait a minute, and then all of a sudden you fix it and they're able to do other things.
Absolutely. I mean, so one of my biggest frustrations in fitness has always been how, people like to stand up and say, there's no evidence for that. So you'll get someone with a load of training experience that'll stand up and say, I found this works, and you'll have all of these academics saying, oh, there's no evidence for that.
Well, don't you think that's an easy way to create yourself as an expert?
It is.
I always think people do that want to be experts. It's like, well, there's no evidence for that.
And the thing that frustrates me is, if you think is, rather than saying there's no evidence for it, what you should be doing is you should be going to these people and saying, that's interesting. I wonder if there's a way that we can study that to find out if you're right, which is what we've always done. Yeah. I'll give you a good story. It's not fitness related, but just an example of why this is so important. If you go back to, I think it's like the early 1900s, where the number of babies that were born at birth, that died at birth was huge. So, babies would be born, they'd get infections, the mothers would get infections, and they would die. And, you'd have hospitals where you'd have days where pretty much, every baby being born was dying, or every mother giving birth was dying. And then all of a sudden, one day, they noticed that there was a doctor who was working who wasn't getting the same level of death rates among babies and among the delivering mothers. So someone, just basically just looked at what he was doing, compared what he was doing to what other people were doing. And the one thing he was doing differently between each delivery, he was washing his hands. That's the thing he was doing differently. And so if someone back then, the thing is, if the mentality of what happens in fitness at the moment, and it's very frustrating, but the mentality of what happens is that if that was today, if someone had said, oh, I wash my hands between birth between babies being born, and that's why I've got a higher success rate. You'd have everyone standing up saying, but there's no evidence of that. And that's what annoys me that's what really annoys me, and it annoys us, is that if you've got someone who's big and muscular and they say, this helped me build muscle, it probably did, right? So don't tell them the wrong
I think it was 1991 or 1992, the old powerlifter that trained me came, we showed up and he gave us these brown boxes like that. They were full of white label bottles of this white powder. And he was like, he gives it to us and he's like, hey, I want you to try this. This is going to be a new product that's going to come out. And it's going to revolutionize the supplements. And we were like, what is it? He's like, it's called creatine. And so he told us, he's like, hey, take X amount of teaspoons. I want you to do this, this, and this. And so I started taking creatine pretty much every single day since I was about 14 or 15 years old. And I remember we got bigger, we got stronger. I mean, you look at it, I mean, he talked about ATP, subvolumization, all this stuff and everything. And then there was this huge, people found that it was like this great deal, and then all of a sudden people started relating it to hamstring pulls, which I never saw a hamstring pull, and I've taken it for all, and then it was kidney problems, all this other stuff, and all these big problems. Then all of a sudden, it was for about 10 years, it was taboo. And even on my site, people would ask me, and I'm like, the fact that you're not taking creatine just shows how uneducated you are, that I think everybody should be taking creatine. And at some point, in the future, they will give every single person creatine every single day. It's going to help neurological. It's going to do all these things. Now, all of a sudden, here we are 20 plus years later, and it's finally coming back, and people are like, if you're not taking creatine, you're behind the curve. I mean, for everybody, for my mom, for everybody in terms of brain health, and they're starting to see the longer, benefits of this. And, and it just because some strength coach said it pulled hamstrings, completely derailed that. And then they made 8,000 different variations of it when the original one was better because it needed ways to keep selling it. So
I think one of the challenges with creatine historically has been that the pharma companies didn't own the products. And therefore, because the big pharma companies didn't own the products, it was very difficult commercially, for it to be pushed in terms of health, because why would any pharma company, and bear in mind, pharma companies do rule the roost. Why would they want things like creatine to be, too popularized? I totally agree that there's a lot of emerging evidence about creatine, reduced symptoms of, Alzheimer's, dementia,
well, and it's so easy. It's easy to get. It's easy to take. And I still to this day get emails from people asking me about creatine, and I'm like, I beat that like a dead fucking horse years ago. And people are like, well, do you have any research? I'm like, I am probably the single longest continuous creatine user that I've ever been associated with. I mean, dude, we were one of the first people to get it in 91, 92. And I've taken it pretty much every single day since then. What's that, over
24 years?
Yeah, 24 years. And so I'm always like, dude, it did pretty well for me, and we started taking it at a young age. That didn't have something that maybe did, was it able to enhance some genes that helped me for athletic performance? Maybe, because I would not have thought I was a good football player when I was younger. When I was, you talked about the more gifted athletes. I think I was more uncoordinated when I was younger, and then all of a sudden, when my size and strength and everything caught up, I was good. But it wasn't until I was older. So maybe that was a key factor.
I mean, anything that enhances, cell energy, and ultimately, with saturated levels of creatine, you're more likely to be able to replenish ATP, or the balance between ATP and ADP. There's a lot of research that's been done on creatine, and it's one of the ones that's very difficult to say that there's no benefit, because again, for certain people there's masses of benefit for creatine, and I think there's a handful of supplements where there will be people that there will be a benefit, and genetically there's reasons why people would benefit.
The other one that's very easy to take is vitamin D. That's the one that just to this day kind of blows my mind. I mean, this research just came out the other day about how they linked low vitamin D levels to MS. And pretty amazing. And I know there's some genetic traits for vitamin D absorption.
There is the VDR gene. We actually test for the VDR gene. We haven't published the results yet. But
So at some point that'll become available.
Absolutely. Probably later this year. But yeah, I mean, vitamin D3 is it's another very, very interesting, very interesting area of research.
Well, especially for muscle growth and performance, it's next to impossible to put on muscle with low vitamin D levels. So that's related to testosterone. Yeah,
Before we cover everything there is to know, I mean, Callie, Bob, and Tex are getting tested, and I think, as is tradition, we've gone over for an hour than we had planned. So we're on our second hour of podcasting. But let's wrap it up now, okay. And then why don't we try and reconnect in a few weeks, maybe September, October, something like that, once these guys get their results back, and then and just continue the conversation.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Yeah, it's great. Sorry, guys, for talking so long.
Kelly, anything else?
No, I think we have a lot of valid information there, and I'm excited to get my saliva submitted and then get my results. But Dan, thanks so much for. It's obvious. The one thing too, it's obvious that I can glean from this conversation is that you actually have a passion for what you're doing, and it's not. Yeah. This isn't just one of those add-on type of procedures that you can do to optimize your performance. It's actually some pretty fascinating shit that can change people's lives, not only, like you said, your performance-based, but not only performance-based, but health-based as well. So I think that there is something for everyone in that.
Well, Kelly, part of the deal, and we coined it, is that empower your performance. And what I always kind of looked for is, not only creating a training system, and being able to kind of put this thing together that not only cashes in and actually reach the benefits that people want. Like if you do the training, all these things kind of happen, but start looking for, other ancillary type items that increase and empower the performance. Like Dan, obviously being, when we connected, I was like, dude, this is phenomenal. This is exactly what we're looking for, because it allows us to take what we do to the next level. Exactly. Just like when we started working with Compex, and the fact that here now we have, EMS units where we can recruit more muscle or more motor units, which translates into better training and being able to balance injuries. Mm-hmm. So, we just don't arbitrarily, and you guys know this, I fucking so about this enough, but we don't arbitrarily just offer out bullshit. I think other people are like, oh, hey, so-and-so is going to give me a code. Great, let's fucking push this thing out.
Every day we battle the bullshit.
Yeah, and we've had,
we do as well.
Yeah. So we get approached by so much fucking worthless shit that I'm like, dude, one, I wouldn't do this. Two, I have no credibility to do this. And three, it just sucks. Yeah. But you come across things like, Fitness Genes, where you're like, dude, this makes sense. Yeah. I understand how to use it. We're going to test it. We're going to run it. And then hopefully at some point, we bring people in, and it just gives us another layer to get more,
to empower performance.
Yeah, empower performance at that granular level, a little bit more minutia. So it's very exciting. Thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, and we'll talk to you next time.
Perfect.
All right, bye. Now it's time for you to empower your performance. Get your genetic testing done by visiting fitnessgenes.com, and for just about $100, you'll be able to stop making assumptions about your diet and training and start trusting the science. You can find co-founder of Fitness Genes, Dr. Dan Reardon, on Instagram @Dan Reardon, or by following Fitness Genes on Facebook. We're looking forward to having Dr. Dan on again as the rest of our results trickle in. Stay tuned to next week when we welcome Rob Miller. He's the author and designer of the popular Map of Athletic Performance. Until next time, bye!